Major legal breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. Oregon, Portland, and now the state of California have refiled to stop the illegal, unconstitutional redeployment of California's state National Guard now because of Judge Immergut legally blocking, I repeat, legally blocking and rightfully Donald Trump from federalizing 200, that's 200 National Guard troops to the city of Portland to combat war-ravaged crime and to protect the ICE buildings. It's not going to happen. It's completely illegal because there's no rebellion, there's no insurrection, and there's currently no war. Let's get into this new reporting, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, an emergency motion has been filed by California and Oregon state officials seeking to block President Trump's redeployment of California National Guard troops to Portland. The move follows a federal judge's order blocking the initial deployment of the Oregon National Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, let's review the background and the content. The context, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, the initial deployment attempt by Donald Trump, that's illegal. On October 4, 2025, U.S. District Judge Karen Immergut temporarily blocked the Trump administration from deploying the Oregon National Guard to Portland for 14 days. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the judge's ruling. Mind you, this judge was appointed by Trump. Immergut, a Trump appointee, ruled that the administration's claim that Portland was war-ravaged was untethered to the facts, that the protests did not justify the use of federalized forces. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go over the circumvention of the order. In response to this ruling, President Trump redeployed approximately 300 federalized California National Guard troops to Oregon. A Pentagon spokesperson confirmed about 200 of those troops were reassigned from Los Angeles, with a portion arriving in Portland on Saturday night, ladies and gentlemen, October 4. Mind you, ladies and gentlemen, the activation is not needed, and this violates the posse comitatus act, which prohibits the military from participating in active domestic law enforcement. That includes the California National Guard and the Oregon National Guard. It just doesn't apply to the military. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go over the response from state officials. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek stated her office had not received formal communication about the deployment and called the action intentional to circumvent yesterday's ruling. California Governor Gavin Newsom called the redeployment a breathtaking abuse of the rule of law and power, and vowed to fight it in court. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to go over the second emergency motion now. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go over the details of the filing. On October 5, 2025, California Attorney General Rob Bonta joined Oregon Attorney General Don Rayfield to file a second emergency motion. They asked the court to block the redeployment of the California troops to Portland. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go over the arguments that are in the motion. The motion argues that the redeployment was an attempt to illegally circumvent the court's prior ruling on the Oregon National Guard. It also highlights that the Trump administration previously argued to the Ninth Circuit Court that the troops were urgently needed in Los Angeles, an argument contradicted by their sudden deployment to Oregon. Ladies and gentlemen, looking forward, a federal judge will now consider the new motion seeking to block the deployment of California's Guard troops. The Trump administration has continued to assert its lawful authority to use federal forces to protect federal property, while state officials argue ladies and gentlemen, the actions violate the rule of law and risks escalating tensions. Ladies and gentlemen, again, what Donald Trump is doing goes against the posse comitatus act, which strictly prohibits law enforcement and federalized subsidies that belong to the state from acting in the capacity of domestic law enforcement. I will have a link down in the video description for the posse comitatus act. Ladies and gentlemen, please subscribe for more, like, comment, and subscribe, and please help me keep the YouTube algorithm up, and please follow me on my social medias that'll be linked in the video description below. Subscribe for more, and follow along for all the legal breaking news you need to know about. More to come soon.